In an effort to understand the life of Walter Benjamin, I searched for movies about him that any plebe could understand. But instead of a Hollywood biopic, I found not one, but two operas about this doomed philosopher's life. One is called Benjamin. Another is Shadow Time.
Is it possible to forget without remembering that one has forgotten?
I listened through it, but still can only describe the plot because there are summaries online, not because I understand it. It seems all over the place. Like, in one scene, Benjamin is interrogated by masked figures. Karl Marx and Groucho Marx taunt him about the nature of memory. Joan of Arc worries about the fate of history, and Albert Einstein asks, what time is it now?
What time is it?
It's trippy, surreal, and dizzying, not unlike Benjamin himself.
He's really a strange kettle of fish.
Howard Island teaches literature at MIT and has been working on Benjamin since the 1980s. He says Benjamin is an eclectic and, yes, difficult writer.
So difficult to translate. Certain sentences just had me mind-boggled for days on end.
And his life was also difficult, though it wasn't always that way. Benjamin was born in 1892 into a prosperous German Jewish family in Berlin. His dad was a well-to-do antique dealer who passed a zeal for bookstores and collecting onto his son. Then, after World War I, Germany went into a depression.
His father put his foot down and said, "Walter, you got to get a job," and he suggested getting a job in a bank, which showed how little he knew his son.
Benjamin instead went on a quest to get a job in academia, but Island says his dissertation at the University of Frankfurt was rejected because it was considered too complicated.
And when that failed in 1925, he then turned to the world of journalism. And I think that was a decisive moment in his life because it enabled him to write about a whole range of things.
In 1927, Benjamin went to Moscow for 2 months to visit a girlfriend. This was after Lenin had died.
And there was an extraordinary sense of experiment going on in Moscow, and it was quite an experience for him.
He eventually returned to Germany, but was forced to leave when the Nazis came to power in 1933. He went to the island of Ibiza, another decisive moment in his life.
There he experienced a kind of rebirth of physical life. And he wrote a whole series of articles about what he called the mimetic capacity, the capacity that he thinks most of us have lost, a capacity to imitate things, to imitate the motions of animals, to imitate the motions of the stars.
Benjamin is constantly drawn to what has disappeared or is at the brink of disappearing, says writer and editor Adam Kirsch. For Benjamin and many Jewish intellectuals at the time, the world was filled with despair.
He had seen fascism take over Germany, which had once been thought of as the most enlightened country in Europe and specifically the best country for Jews in Europe. And he, like many other people, saw democracy and capitalism as on the road to failure.
In 1935, Benjamin wrote The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, a critique of capitalism and one of his most well-known pieces.
Where he talks about how the sort of transformation of the way people consume art from individual objects that have a sort of magical status like a painting to mass media like newspapers and magazines and movies and radio.
Benjamin spent the last years of his life in France. When Germany invaded in 1940, he was one of millions of people trying to escape. He reached the border between Spain and France, but the border was closed, and in his despair, he overdosed on morphine.
And then as it turned out, the next day the border was reopened and the other people in his group managed to cross over. He didn't. He had despaired at the wrong moment.
A few months before he died, Benjamin wrote Theses on the Philosophy of History, his final work. In this essay, he writes,
"There is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism."
And in some ways, his life is that document. But as Benjamin also says,
"The past can be seen only as an image, which flashes up at the instant when it can be recognized, and is never seen again."
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Holly J. McDede.